I still remember the way the morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen table that day, painting everything gold except me. Mom was beaming, Dad had that proud sparkle in his eyes, and my brother Ethan sat there like a king, swirling his orange juice as if the world belonged to him. I just told them I'd been approved for a mortgage, my first home, after years of saving and working double shifts. But before I could even finish the sentence, Mom cut me off. Celeste, we actually have news too. Ethan will be taking Grandma's house. My breath caught in my throat. Grandma's house, the one I'd spent every weekend helping renovate, the one they'd promised would be mine someday. Ethan smirked like he already knew. Dad added casually, "It just makes sense, he's the eldest." In that moment, everything tilted. All my sacrifices dismissed with a single sentence. Would you still stay loyal to a family that clearly picked their favorite? For a few seconds, no one moved. The room felt heavier, as if the air had thickened. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft clinking of Ethan's spoon against his glass. I forced myself to breathe. My fingers tightened around my coffee mug until my knuckles whitened. "Wait," I finally whispered. I thought you said." Mom's smile didn't falter. "Sweetheart, plans change. You have your own things going on. We thought this would be easier for everyone." Ethan leaned back, spreading his arms across the chair like a lord surveying his estate. "Yeah, Sel, it just makes sense. I mean, I've got a family now. The house has more space. It's logical." Logical. That word sliced deeper than I expected. All those weekends scraping off old wallpaper until my shoulders ached, sanding floors until my palms blistered, repainting kitchen cabinets with my bare hands. Apparently, none of it counted for anything. "I helped fix that house," I murmured, almost to myself. Dad folded his newspaper with deliberate slowness, finally giving me his full attention. His tone was calm, almost condescending. "You helped because you wanted to, Celeste. No one forced you. That doesn't give you ownership." The words felt like a punch wrapped in silk. Ethan's smirk widened, and Mom reached across the table to pat my hand, like I was a child who didn't know any better. "You're so sentimental," she said lightly. "This is what families do. We support each other. Your time will come." Your time will come. I'd heard that exact phrase too many times, during birthdays when Ethan's successes were celebrated and mine were nice too, at family dinners where I was expected to clear the table while Ethan discussed his big plans with Dad. But this time, something cracked inside me. I tried to smile through the burning in my chest. "Right, of course, if it's best for everyone." Mom's response was automatic, like a reflex. "Good girl." She turned back to Ethan, asking about his job. Dad chimed in with a story about Ethan's promotion. Laughter floated through the room, warm and lively, except none of it reached me. I sat there, invisible, watching their faces light up as if this were the happiest news of the year. The sunlight shifted slowly across the floor, casting long shadows on the cabinets I'd repainted myself last spring. My eyes caught my reflection in the kitchen window. I looked small, not physically, but in the way someone can feel like a background character in their own life. When I was little, I believed that if I just worked hard enough, if I was kind enough, if I gave enough, they would see me. They would love me the way they loved Ethan. But as Mom laughed at one of his jokes and Dad gave him that proud look, a cold, quiet truth settled in my chest. This wasn't about effort. It never had been. Ethan didn't need to earn their love, he was born into it, wrapped in gold. I'd spent my life trying to catch scraps from the table. I excused myself, muttering something about needing to make a call. No one looked up. No one asked if I was okay. I walked down the hallway, my steps echoing in the house where every corner held a memory of me trying, painting, fixing, helping, waiting to be chosen. I stood in the bathroom with the door locked, gripping the sink as the tears finally came. Not loud sobs, just the silent kind, the kind that burn your throat and make your shoulders shake. I stared at my face in the mirror, blotchy and confused, and whispered to my reflection, "Why am I never enough for them?" I didn't have an answer. All I had was that moment, etched deep inside me, the moment I realized that in my family's story, I'd always been a footnote. I drove home that afternoon with the radio turned off, letting the silence fill the car. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, knuckles pale, the same way they used to tighten around paint rollers and hammers in Grandma's house. I couldn't stop thinking about the way Mom had said it, so casually, like announcing the weather. Ethan would get Grandma's house. Simple. Final. As the familiar streets rolled by, my mind drifted back to that house. Not the polished real estate Ethan now bragged about, but the version I first walked into at 19. Creaky floors, faded floral wallpaper peeling off the walls, a kitchen with rusted hinges, and a faint smell of lavender that never went away. Grandma had looked at me with her soft, wrinkled smile and said, "One day, this place will shine again. You have a good eye, Celeste." And I believed her. Back then, every Saturday morning was sacred. I'd throw on my oldest jeans, tie my hair up, and head over to Grandma's house with a toolbox I'd borrowed from Dad, though I was the only one who ever used it. Ethan always had excuses. "I've got practice. I've got plans. I'm too tired." But I didn't mind. I loved being there with Grandma. She'd sit in her armchair, knitting, telling me stories about how she and Grandpa had built the house together after the war. I'd nod along, scraping off old paint from the window frames, imagining the way the house must have looked when it was new. The first big project I took on was the living room walls. The wallpaper was older than I was, yellowed and brittle. I spent hours steaming it off, strip by strip, until my fingers were sore. Grandma brought me lemonade in her favorite floral glass and said, "Patience makes things beautiful." When the walls were finally bare, I painted them a warm cream color. She cried when she saw it finished, not out of sadness, but because, as she said, "You brought the light back." Every room had a memory like that. The kitchen, I replaced all the cabinet handles myself, one by one, after watching a dozen YouTube tutorials. The bathroom, I recocked the tub because the grout had started to crack. Ethan never showed up for any of it, but when family visited, he'd say, "Yeah, we've been working on the place," like he had lifted a single finger. I never corrected him. I told myself it didn't matter. What mattered was Grandma was happy. There was one evening, late fall, when Grandma and I sat on the porch after painting the shutters dark green. The air was crisp and the leaves crunched under our feet. She looked at me and said, "You know, Celeste, this house, it has a heartbeat. You keep it alive." I laughed it off at the time, embarrassed by how much that meant to me. But deep down, I carried her words like a metal pinned somewhere invisible. When she passed away 2 years later, I spent days in that house alone, cleaning every corner before the funeral. It was my way of saying goodbye. I remember standing in the kitchen, looking at the cabinets I'd painted and whispering, "I'll take care of it. I promise." That promise had lived quietly in the back of my mind ever since. Now, hearing that Ethan would take over felt like someone had taken that promise, crumpled it up, and tossed it in the trash. When I pulled into my apartment parking lot, I sat there for a long time before getting out. The sun was setting, casting the same kind of light I'd seen that morning at the kitchen table, golden, warm, indifferent. I thought about the smell of lavender, the way Grandma used to hum while knitting, the tiny green flecks of paint that stayed on my nails for weeks after we painted the shutters. My phone buzzed. A message from Mom. "Don't take things so personally, sweetheart. Ethan needs the house more than you'd. Be happy for him. Be happy for him." I stared at the message until the words blurred. She didn't understand. She never had. To her, my contributions were chores. Ethan's mere existence was an accomplishment. I wanted to reply, to explain how that house wasn't just a building to me, it was years of love, sweat, and quiet hope. But I knew my words would bounce off the same invisible wall they always did. So I put the phone down, leaned my head against the steering wheel, and let the ache in my chest spread like ink in water. That house had been my sanctuary. And now, it felt like a stolen heirloom displayed in someone else's window. 2 days passed before I found the courage to bring it up again. I'd been replaying that breakfast conversation over and over in my head like a scratched record, trying to convince myself I'd misunderstood something. Maybe there was some detail I missed. Maybe Mom had phrased it badly. Maybe, just maybe, they hadn't really meant it the way it sounded. So I drove to my parents' house on a Wednesday evening after work. The sky was overcast, a low gray pressing down, and the porch light was already on when I parked in the driveway. Through the window, I could see Mom setting the table for dinner, humming softly. Everything looked painfully normal. "Celeste, you didn't say you were coming," Mom said as soon as I walked through the door. She wiped her hands on a towel and gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, the kind reserved for polite company. "I needed to talk," I said, hanging my coat. Dad was in his usual armchair, reading the paper. He lowered it just enough to look at me. "Everything all right?" His voice was calm, almost too calm, like he already sensed where this was going. I sat down at the edge of the sofa. "About Grandma's house," I began carefully. "I just want to understand. You told me years ago that it would be mine someday. I've spent so much time fixing it, taking care of it. And then suddenly Ethan gets it? No discussion, no warning, why?" Mom exchanged a quick glance with Dad. It was subtle, but I caught it. That silent parental look that says, "Let me handle this." She sat down across from me, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Sweetheart, you're overthinking this, she said in that soft tone she used when I was little and crying over scraped knees. Ethan has a family now, a wife, 2 kids. He needs the space more than you do. You're young, independent, you'll figure things out. But that house, my voice cracked despite my best efforts. It's not just some property to me, I poured myself into it. And Grandma, Dad cut me off gently but firmly. Celeste, you helped because you wanted to. That doesn't entitle you to anything. We appreciate what you did, but Ethan is the eldest. It's traditional. It makes sense for him to carry on the family home. Traditional, I almost laughed. Traditional like the way they ignored every accomplishment of mine unless it somehow benefited Ethan? I'm not asking to take it away from him, I said quickly, because a part of me was still desperate for them to see me, to understand. I just thought I'd at least have a say, or that maybe we'd share it, or that you'd talk to me first before deciding. Mom reached out and placed her hand on mine. Her smile was gentle, her eyes pitying. Honey, you have your own life. You've always been the strong, responsible one. You don't need the house the way Ethan does. We trust you'll be fine. The words landed like small stones in my chest. They didn't see me as someone who deserved anything. They saw me as the reliable one, the daughter who would understand, who wouldn't make a fuss. What about what I need? I asked quietly. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Dad sighed like I was being unreasonable. You need to stop taking everything so personally. This isn't about you, it's about what's best for the family. Best for the family? In our house, that had always meant best for Ethan. Mom stood up, smoothing her shirt as if to signal the conversation was over. Stay for dinner, she said brightly. Ethan and the kids are coming over soon. We can all eat together. It'll be nice. The last thing I wanted was to sit at that table pretending everything was fine while Ethan strutted in like a hero. No, thanks, I should get going, I muttered, grabbing my coat. Celeste, Dad said sharply. I froze at the doorway. His voice softened again, but there was an edge to it. Don't make this a bigger deal than it is. You're a good daughter. Don't ruin that over something like this. Something like this. I turned slowly. Something like this is my entire childhood home. The place I spent years working on. The place Grandma trusted me with. Mom's face tightened just for a second before she plastered on that practice smile again. We love you, sweetheart. Don't let jealousy get in the way of family. Jealousy. The word hit me like cold water. That's what they thought this was. Not betrayal, not hurt, just petty jealousy. I'm not jealous, I said, but my voice was shaking. I'm just disappointed. And I walked out before they could see the tears threatening to spill. The night air was cold, biting at my cheeks as I got into my car. Through the living room window, I could see Mom clearing the table, Dad picking his paper back up. Within seconds, it was as if I'd never been there at all. Driving away, I gripped the steering wheel tight, blinking fast to keep my vision clear. For the first time in my life, I felt the unmistakable sensation of standing on the outside of my own family, knocking on a door that would never fully open for me. The night after that conversation, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of traffic outside my apartment. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the living room of Grandma's house, the cream-colored walls I'd painted, the sunlight pouring through the lace curtains she'd refused to replace, the little porcelain cat on the windowsill that she said brought good fortune. It had been 2 years since she passed, but sometimes it felt like yesterday. I remember the last week I spent with her more vividly than almost anything else in my life. She had been getting weaker, her hands trembling more each day, but her mind was sharp. I came over after work every evening, bringing soup and magazines and sitting with her on that floral sofa with the sunken cushions. She'd tell me the same stories I'd heard 100 times before, about how Grandpa built the porch with his bare hands, about the first Christmas tree they decorated together in that very living room, about Ethan as a toddler running through the hallway with a saucepan on his head. She never mentioned me as a child in those stories. I wasn't hurt by it. I knew I came later, after the glory years of the house. But she always looked at me differently. When we were alone, her eyes softened in a way no one else's ever did. One evening, just a few weeks before she passed, I was fixing a loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen while she watched from her chair. Celeste, she said suddenly. Her voice was weaker than usual, like a thread being pulled thin. Yeah, Grandma? I tightened the last screw and turned toward her. She was holding her knitting needles but not knitting. She stared at me for a long time before speaking again. You have a good heart. You see things other people don't, I laughed softly. Like loose hinges and broken pipes? No, she said, smiling faintly. Like potential, this house, she gestured around her. It needs someone who cares, someone who will protect it, that's you. Her words landed somewhere deep in my chest. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and went back to my work, but inside, a warmth spread like sunlight after rain. On her last day, when the house was full of relatives and whispered prayers, I snuck into her bedroom for a moment alone. She was drifting in and out of sleep. I held her hand and whispered, "I'll take care of it, I promise." She squeezed my fingers, weak but deliberate. That memory is carved into me like a carving on the porch railings Ethan wants to tear down now. I sat up in bed and turned on the lamp. My apartment was small, neat, practical. It didn't have a porch. It didn't have shutters I'd painted myself. It didn't smell like lavender and wood polish. I got out of bed and pulled a dusty shoebox from the back of my closet. Inside were old photos I'd taken during the renovation, the before pictures with peeling wallpaper, the progress shots with splatters of paint on my jeans, the finished living room gleaming like a new chapter. At the bottom of the box was a folded letter, Grandma's handwriting, shaky but elegant. "My dearest Celeste," it began. "You've given this house so much love. I know deep down you'll keep its heart beating. Whatever happens, trust your instincts. They won't fail you." I'd forgotten she'd written that. Reading it now felt like someone was both hugging and stabbing me at the same time. Tears welled in my eyes, but they were different from the ones I'd cried in the bathroom the day of the announcement. Those had been tears of shock, of feeling small. These were tears of something deeper, betrayal. Not just betrayal of me, but of her. Of what she believed. They had turned her home into a bargaining chip, Ethan's new investment project, Mom and Dad's symbol of family tradition. And in doing so, they'd erased her wishes and mine like they were nothing more than pencil marks on paper. I traced my fingers over the edges of the letter, thinking about the porch where we sat together that autumn evening, painting shutters. I remembered the way she'd nodded approvingly at my careful brushstrokes, saying, "You pay attention. That's rare." I'd been so proud then, so sure that love and effort would mean something in the end. But lying back down, letter still clutched in my hand, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. In my family, sentiment didn't matter. Promises didn't matter. Effort didn't matter. Only Ethan did. And for the first time, the hurt began to harden into something else. Not anger, not yet, but something heavier, like the slow gathering of storm clouds on the horizon. It started with a notification. I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't snooping. I was just scrolling through real estate listings on my lunch break, dreaming about maybe buying a small place of my own someday. Then, halfway down the page, a photo caught my eye, cream-colored living room walls, dark green shutters visible through the window, and a porch I could have traced with my eyes closed. Grandma's house. I froze. The listing title read, "Charming family home with modern potential, prime location." The asking price was absurd. My heart started pounding. I clicked it. There were 20 glossy photos, all the spaces I'd worked on, staged and spotless, like they'd erased every trace of my labor and replaced it with some realtor's fantasy. And then the contact info at the bottom, listed by Ethan Lambert. For a moment, everything around me faded. The chatter in the break room, the hum of the vending machine, all gone. Just me and the betrayal glowing on my phone screen. I zoomed in on one of the kitchen shots. They'd taken down Grandma's lace curtains. The warm cream walls I'd painted now had a trendy gray tone. The porch swing was gone. The lavender bed looked like it had been ripped out. I felt sick. My first instinct was denial. It must be a mistake. Maybe they were testing the market. Maybe it was someone else with the same last name. But no. There was Ethan in the realtor bio photo, wearing a blazer he'd borrowed from Dad for job interviews. I locked my phone and pressed it to my chest. I could feel my pulse racing beneath it. After work, I drove straight to the house. There were for sale flyers stuck in the mailbox and a sign planted in the yard with Ethan's name in bold. He hadn't wasted any time. It had barely been a month since the family gathering. I sat in my car across the street for nearly 20 minutes, watching through the windshield as strangers wandered up the porch steps with a realtor. One woman ran her hand along the porch railing, my railing, the same way I had that night during the party. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. How could he do this so easily? How could Mom and Dad let him? The front door opened and Ethan stepped out, laughing with a couple. He was in sales mode, confident, charming. "Yeah, it's a special place," he said, like he had earned the right to say those words. "We just feel it's time for a new chapter." A new chapter. My chest burned. I wasn't even sure when I got out of the car. One second I was gripping the wheel, the next I was marching across the street. "Ethan," I called out. He turned, startled at first, then that infuriating smirk returned. "Celeste, didn't expect to see you here." "What the hell is this?" I gestured at the sign. "Selling the house," he said simply, as if announcing he'd bought milk. "This is Grandma's house. You just moved in." "Exactly," he said, shrugging. "And it's mine now. I can do what I want with it. Rachel and I found a bigger place out near the lake. The market's hot. It'd be stupid not to sell." I stared at him. "So all that talk about family tradition and you need it more was just what, convenient?" "Don't be dramatic," he said, glancing at the realtor couple, embarrassed. "Look, you're independent. You don't need a house like this. I've got kids to think about. And honestly, it's not personal, it's just business. Just business." That was the moment something inside me shifted. Up until then, I'd been hurt, yes, blindsided, betrayed, but this was calculated, cold. "I spent years fixing this place," I said quietly, almost shaking. "I kept it alive when you didn't care," he sighed. "Sell, you helped because you wanted to. No one owes you anything. You're being weird about this." I laughed once, bitterly. "Weird? You're selling Grandma's house like it's a used car." "Because it is mine," he snapped. "Grow up." The words hung in the air between us. For a heartbeat, I almost shouted back. But then I caught sight of the couple on the porch, watching like we were entertainment. And suddenly, I didn't want to give him a show. I turned and walked back to my car, my hands trembling as I unlocked the door. I didn't cry this time. I just sat there, staring at the for sale sign, my mind spinning. Ethan was selling. Mom and Dad had to know. They'd helped him get the house. They'd probably even encouraged it. I thought about Grandma's letter, folded neatly in my nightstand. "Trust your instincts." For the first time, I started to wonder if there was more to this than favoritism. Maybe something legal, something hidden. I pulled out my phone and took photos of the sign, the flyers, the realtor listing. If Ethan thought I was going to sit quietly while he erased everything, he didn't know me as well as he thought. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house without calling first. I didn't want to give them time to prepare excuses. My hands were cold on the steering wheel even though the heater was blasting. I kept replaying Ethan's smug face in my head, his just business tone echoing like a broken record. Mom was in the kitchen when I walked in, humming to herself as she arranged flowers in a vase. She looked up, surprised but smiling. "Celeste, what a nice surprise." I didn't return the smile. "Why is Ethan selling Grandma's house?" The question landed like a dropped plate. Her hands froze mid-arrangement, a daisy bent between her fingers. "I saw the listing," I continued, stepping closer. "He's already showing it to strangers. He's planning to sell it." Mom recovered quickly, placing the flowers into the vase with exaggerated care. "Well, yes, he mentioned something about that. It's his house now. He can do what he wants with it." I stared at her. "You told me he was getting it because he needed it for his family, because it made sense, because of tradition." "You made it sound like it was some noble, family-centered decision." She sighed, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "Celeste, don't twist my words. He does have a family and he's making choices for their future. Selling the house gives him a chance to build something bigger for his children. You should be happy for him." "Happy?" I almost laughed. "Happy that he's cashing in on our grandmother's home while you all stood there pretending it was about heritage. Do you hear yourself?" "Lower your voice," she snapped suddenly, her smile cracking for a brief second. "This isn't something to make a scene about. Ethan has every right to do this." I leaned on the counter, trying to steady myself. "What about my right? What about the years I spent working on that house? What about the promise I made to Grandma?" Her expression softened just slightly, but not in the way I wanted. It was the same soft look she always gave me when she expected me to be the reasonable one. "Sweetheart, you've always been the strong one, the practical one. You'll be fine. You don't need that house the way Ethan does. You have a good job, your own apartment. He's the one with responsibilities." Responsibilities. That word always meant Ethan's life matters more. "You're not listening," I said quietly. "I am," she replied, in that infuriatingly calm way that said she'd already decided. "But this isn't about you, it's about the family as a whole. And sometimes the best thing you can do for family is to step aside gracefully." Step aside gracefully. I felt something inside me click, a tiny, sharp sound like the last thread snapping. "You didn't even talk to me," I said. "You didn't even ask how I felt." "Because we knew you, understand," she said simply. I stared at her stunned. "That's not understanding, that's being ignored." Her jaw tightened. "Celeste, don't start." I wanted to scream, to shake her, to make her see. But instead, I turned toward the hallway and started walking. "Where are you going?" she called after me. "To the study," I said without turning back. "I want to see the deed." Her footsteps followed me quickly. "Celeste, this isn't appropriate." But I ignored her. The study hadn't changed much over the years, the same oak desk, the same shelves of dusty encyclopedias no one touched anymore. Dad's filing cabinet sat against the wall, a place I'd known since childhood but never had a reason to open. I crouched down, rifling through folders until I found the one labeled Lambert Property House. Inside were tax receipts, utility bills, a few old photos. I scanned the documents quickly. Deed transfer Ethan Lambert, dated 3 weeks before Grandma's death. My stomach dropped. Mom hovered in the doorway, arms crossed. "Celeste, stop. You transferred the house to Ethan before she passed," I said, my voice trembling. "It was her wish," she replied too quickly. I looked up at her sharply. "Was it because she told me?" I stopped myself. I didn't want to give away everything yet. She straightened her posture, slipping into that polished, untouchable tone she used when she wanted to shut down a conversation. "Your grandmother wanted to make things simple. She didn't want any fighting after she was gone. Ethan was the obvious choice." "Obvious to who?" "To everyone except you, apparently," she snapped. I stared at the deed in my hands, 3 weeks before she died. Grandma had been bedridden by then, her handwriting shaky, her energy fading. I remembered sitting beside her during that time. She never once mentioned transferring the house. She talked about paint colors for the kitchen, about the weather, about me keeping the house's heartbeat alive. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. I slipped my phone out and discreetly took photos of the documents before closing the folder. Mom watched me, eyes narrowing. "What are you doing?" "Making sure I understand," I said evenly. "This isn't a fight you want, Celeste," she warned. I looked at her, really looked at her. For years, I'd seen my mother as a pillar, someone who cared but maybe just didn't understand me. But at that moment, I saw the calculation in her eyes, the quiet certainty that I'd fold like I always did. I walked past her toward the front door. "Celeste," she called after me, "don't be foolish." I paused, hand on the doorknob. "Maybe for once," I said softly, "I won't be." Outside, the air felt different, sharper, colder, clearer. I sat in my car for a long time, scrolling through the photos I'd taken. Deed transfer dates, signatures, Ethan's name everywhere. My heart was still raw, but beneath it, something steadier was forming, a plan. For years, they'd assumed my silence was acceptance, but silence can also be strategy. I opened my notes app and wrote one word at the top of a blank page, proof. I spent the next few days in a haze of quiet obsession. During the day, I went to work, nodded at coworkers, answered emails like everything was fine. But at night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by piles of folders, scanned documents, and notes on legal terms I barely understood. I'd always been the responsible one, the person who kept things tidy and predictable. No one in my family expected me to fight back, least of all Ethan. Maybe that's why it felt so strange, almost exhilarating, to pull at the threads they'd left dangling. The first thread was Grandma's old cedar chest. It had been sitting in Mom and Dad's attic for years, untouched. One Saturday morning, I drove over early, before anyone was awake, and climbed the creaky attic stairs. The air smelled of dust and insulation. Sunlight filtered through the small round window, lighting up particles like tiny golden stars. I found the chest in the corner under a faded quilt. My hands hesitated on the latch for just a moment. This wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was hers. Inside were the usual treasures, photo albums, knitting projects she never finished, old letters from Grandpa. But at the bottom, beneath a stack of envelopes, was a blue folder I didn't recognize. Neat handwriting on the front read, "Legal Estate." My heart picked up speed. I opened it carefully. Inside were old insurance papers, tax forms, and there it was, a copy of Grandma's will. The pages were thin and slightly yellowed, but the signatures were clear. I skimmed the paragraphs, my eyes darting over legal jargon that made my head spin until a sentence stopped me cold. "The property located at 214 Willow Creek shall be divided equally among my grandchildren, Celeste Lambert and Ethan Lambert, to be shared as joint beneficiaries." I read it again, and again. My hands were shaking. Joint beneficiaries. She hadn't left the house solely to Ethan. She had intended it to be shared. I sank down onto the attic floor, the folder resting in my lap. My pulse roared in my ears. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined the way she'd looked at me, the way she'd spoken about the house. She had meant for me to have a part of it, which meant that something had happened between the writing of this will and the deed transfer that gave Ethan full ownership. I took a deep breath and snapped photos of every page, careful not to damage the fragile paper. Then I folded the will back exactly as I'd found it, tucked the folder at the bottom of the chest again, and closed the lid. I didn't want Mom to know I'd been there. Not yet. Back in my car, I stared at the photos on my phone. The legal wording was clear. It wasn't vague or ambiguous. If this document was legitimate, and I had no reason to think it wasn't, then Ethan's deed ownership wasn't just morally wrong. It might be legally questionable. That night, I fell down a rabbit hole of estate law forums. I typed in phrases like joint beneficiaries property transfer, will versus deed dispute, siblings inheritance rights USA. Most of the responses were complicated, but a few key things stood out. A valid will can override informal family arrangements. Transferring property before death requires consent and legal capacity. If one beneficiary is cut out through questionable transfers, the other can contest. The more I read, the more a quiet fury began to simmer beneath my ribs. They had counted on me not knowing any of this. They had counted on me to nod, smile, and step aside. On Sunday afternoon, I called Marissa, my closest friend, the only person who knew everything. She answered on the second ring. "Tell me you didn't spend the entire weekend reading legal stuff," she said, half teasing, half concerned. I didn't answer. "Oh my God," she muttered. "You did." "I found her will," I said. Silence. Then you what? "In the attic, it says she left the house to both of us, equally joint beneficiaries, but Ethan's name is on the deed alone, dated 3 weeks before she died. Holy shit. I think they transferred it while she was sick." Marissa let out a low whistle. That's not just shady, Sel. That's potentially illegal." I chewed my lip. "I don't even know where to start." "You start by not letting them gaslight you," she said firmly. "Get a lawyer. Get someone who actually knows how to untangle this." The idea of bringing in a lawyer made my stomach twist. This was my family. But then I remembered Mom's words. "We knew you'd understand." They hadn't treated me like family when they made these decisions. Why should I protect their comfort now? I looked down at the will again, the words practically glowing on my screen. Joint beneficiaries. It wasn't just a sentimental attachment anymore. There was legal weight. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to what they'd done. I was building a case. I didn't sleep much the night after finding the will. Every time I closed my eyes, the words joint beneficiaries flashed like a neon sign behind my eyelids. There it was proof that I hadn't imagined everything. Proof that Grandma's intentions had been clear. And yet, somehow, Ethan had ended up as the sole owner. I knew I couldn't navigate this alone. I needed someone who understood more than late-night Google searches. So on Monday, during my lunch break, I called Hannah, a college friend who had gone to law school and now worked at a small but reputable firm downtown. "Celeste Lambert," she said as soon as she picked up. "Wow, it's been a while. What's up?" Her cheerful tone almost made me falter. I hadn't talked to her in years. We kept in touch through the occasional birthday text and LinkedIn updates, but I forced myself to focus. "Hey." "Yeah, it has been. I actually need your help, legal help." That got her attention. "Okay," she said, her voice turning serious. "What's going on?" "It's about my grandmother's house," I explained quickly. "She passed 2 years ago. There was a will. It said the house should go to both me and my brother, but somehow, before she died, the deed was transferred to him alone, 3 weeks before she passed." There was a pause on the line. 3 weeks, she repeated slowly. "Yes, she was bedridden at the time." "I've got photos of the deed transfer, the will, everything. Can I send them to you?" "Absolutely. Email them right now. I'll take a look tonight." I hung up and immediately scanned and emailed every document I had, the photos of the deed, the will from the attic, even screenshots of the real estate listing. For the rest of the day, I was useless at work. I kept checking my phone, waiting for her response. It came at 9:42 p.m. "Hannah, I've gone through everything. We need to talk. Can you come by my office tomorrow?" My stomach fluttered with a mix of dread and hope. The next afternoon, I sat across from her in a small office lined with law books and potted plants. She had spread the documents out on her desk, marked with sticky notes. "Okay," she said, adjusting her glasses. "This is complicated but not hopeless. First of all, this will is valid. It's signed, witnessed, and notarized. If no other version exists, this is legally binding. The house should have gone to both you and Ethan equally." I exhaled slowly. I knew it. "But," she continued, "this deed transfer changes things. If your grandmother knowingly and willingly signed the house over to Ethan before she passed, that could override the will for the property itself. But there's a huge question mark here." She pointed to the date. "This was signed 3 weeks before her death. You said she was bedridden?" "Yes," I said. "She was weak. She could barely knit anymore. She needed help to walk from her bedroom to the kitchen." Hannah leaned back in her chair. "Then the question becomes, did she have the legal capacity to sign this transfer? If she didn't fully understand what she was signing, or if someone unduly influenced her, this deed could be challenged, especially since it contradicts the will." A cold chill spread through me. "You're saying someone might have pressured her?" She gave me a measured look. "I'm saying it happens, more often than people think. Especially in families. The combination of illness, old age, and family dynamics can be a recipe for abuse of power." My mind flashed to Mom, sitting at the kitchen table, saying Ethan was the obvious choice. To Dad, folding his newspaper with that calm, dismissive look. To Ethan's smirk when I confronted him outside the house. "I want to challenge it," I said. The words came out steadier than I expected. Hannah nodded slowly. "That's possible, but we need evidence. Medical records, witness testimony, anything that can show she wasn't in a condition to make that kind of legal decision. And we'll also want to look at who facilitated the deed transfer. If it was your parents, that's significant." I swallowed hard. "It was." She raised an eyebrow. "I found the deed in Dad's filing cabinet," I said. "They transferred it before she passed. They must have handled everything." She tapped her pen thoughtfully. "Then we follow the paper trail. I'll pull property records, power of attorney filings, anything related. And Celeste?" She leaned forward slightly. "Don't tell them you're doing this. Not yet." I nodded. That night, as I sat at my kitchen table again, Hannah's words echoed in my head: undue influence, legal capacity. Words that sounded clinical but carried the weight of everything I'd suspected deep down. Grandma hadn't given Ethan that house. They had taken it. 2 days later, Hannah called me with an update. "Celeste, I found something." My pulse quickened. "What?" "She didn't sign the deed herself," Hannah said. "Your father signed as her power of attorney. The document was filed just days before the transfer. It looks like he obtained power of attorney when she was already in hospice care." I nearly dropped my phone. "He what?" "And here's the kicker," she continued. "The witnesses listed on the POA are your mother and one of your uncle's business partners. This isn't illegal on its face, but it raises serious questions about coercion and conflict of interest, especially since the will contradicts the outcome." My world tilted again, but this time it wasn't with helplessness. It was with clarity. This was no misunderstanding, no accidental oversight. This was a coordinated move. They had used power of attorney to override Grandma's will and hand the house to Ethan. Twist one had just landed, and it burned. I sat down heavily, my mind racing with everything this meant. If this came to light in court, it wouldn't just be about the house. It would expose Mom and Dad's role in everything. For years, I'd accepted being the background character. But now I was holding the script, and I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. I knew storming into my parents' house again or confronting Ethan head-on wouldn't get me anywhere. They were too used to seeing me as the emotional one, the good daughter who cried quietly and then accepted whatever decision had been made. If I wanted to undo what they'd done, I had to stop playing the part they'd cast me in. So I decided to become someone new. Not outwardly, I didn't change my clothes or dye my hair, but I changed my approach. I became warm, approachable, agreeable. I called Ethan first. "Hey," I said as casually as I could manage. "Do you have a minute?" He sounded surprised but pleased. "Celeste, wow, didn't expect to hear from you. What's up?" "I was just thinking about the house," I said, injecting a small laugh into my voice. "I was a bit emotional the other day. I don't want things to be weird between us." A pause. Then, "Oh, yeah, no worries, I get it. It's a lot of change." "I thought maybe," I continued, "I could help you get it ready for selling. I mean, I know that place better than anyone. And if you're going to sell it, at least let me make sure it looks good, you know?" Ethan chuckled. "You want to help me sell the house?" "Why not?" I forced a lightness I didn't feel. It was Grandma's place. If someone going to buy it, I want it to be someone who appreciates it, and I can help with staging and fixing those little things buyers notice. It worked. I could hear his ego inflating through the phone. "Yeah, okay. That actually sounds great. You always had an eye for that stuff." Rachel and I could use the help. We agreed I'd come by that weekend. When I hung up, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I'd spent so long reacting. Now I was setting the terms. Saturday morning was crisp and sunny. I pulled into the driveway with a box of tools in my trunk and my hair tied back like old times. The house looked the same from the outside, but I noticed the realtor's sign now had "Open House Coming Soon" stapled to it. My stomach twisted, but I pushed the feeling down. Ethan met me on the porch, wearing a polo shirt and mirrored sunglasses like some suburban salesman. "Hey, sis," he said with exaggerated cheerfulness. "Hey," I echoed. "Let's make this place shine, huh?" Inside, Rachel was rearranging furniture while their kids watched cartoons on a tablet. She gave me a quick nod but didn't look thrilled to see me. Fine, she wasn't my target anyway. Ethan started walking me through his plans, which mostly consisted of vague ideas he'd read online. Painting over the cream walls with gray, replacing the porch swing with something trendier, and possibly knocking out the kitchen wall. I nodded, smiled, made small suggestions that sounded helpful but didn't reveal anything about what I was actually doing there. Honestly, he said, leaning against the counter like a visionary, I think we can get above asking. This location is hot. And with a few tweaks, it's going to be irresistible. I wanted to scream, but instead I said, you might be right. While he talked, I took mental notes. He was overconfident, sloppy. He left paperwork lying around on the dining table, contractor estimates, realtor emails, mortgage pre-approval letters for the new lake house he and Rachel wanted to buy. When he went upstairs to check on something, I snapped quick photos of everything. I also noticed a small safe tucked into the corner of the hallway closet, partly hidden by coats. I didn't touch it, not yet, but I made a note of it. Later, as we worked outside, Ethan let his guard down further. He'd always liked the sound of his own voice. You know, he said, hammering a loose porch board with unnecessary force, I really appreciate you helping. I wasn't sure if you'd hold a grudge. I laughed softly. What's there to hold? It's done. I just want to make sure the house looks good. For Grandma, you know? He smiled, satisfied. I knew you'd come around. You've always been reasonable, not like Rachel's sister. Total nightmare when their parents passed. He launched into a story about a messy inheritance dispute in Rachel's family. I listened carefully. Buried between his bragging and mockery, he mentioned something that made my ears prick up. And honestly, the lawyer said if the will's clear, you're fine. Unless someone tries to challenge it, but who would do that in their own family, right? He laughed at his own joke. I forced a smile. Yeah, who would? As the day went on, I played my part flawlessly. I sanded a few spots on the porch rail, adjusted picture frames, even suggested better light bulbs for the hallway. To anyone watching, I looked like the supportive sister helping prepare the family home for sale. But inside, every move was calculated. I was cataloging evidence. Identifying weak points, mapping out their timeline. Before leaving, Ethan handed me a set of spare keys. In case you want to come by and do any touch-ups during the week, he said. I almost laughed at how easy he made it. Driving home, the keys in my pocket felt heavy, not because of their weight, but because of what they represented. For years, this house had been something I poured my soul into. Then it became a symbol of betrayal. Now it was my battlefield. And for the first time, I wasn't walking into it defenseless. The house was quiet on Wednesday afternoon when I let myself in with the spare keys. Ethan and Rachel were both at work, the kids at school. The realtor sign in the front yard flapped lazily in the breeze. I told him I'd be coming by to touch up some details before the weekend's open house. In reality, I had a different plan. The first few minutes, I moved around the house with a paintbrush and rag, making a show of cleaning baseboards and patching nail holes. But my eyes kept scanning. I'd grown up in this house. I knew its corners, its quirks, its secrets. If there was anything important, anything they thought was hidden, I'd find it. I started in the living room. The built-in shelves still held a few old photo albums that Rachel hadn't thrown out yet. I flipped through them absently, looking for anything tucked inside. Nothing. Next, I moved to Grandma's old bedroom. It was strange being in there without her. The air was still faintly perfumed with lavender sachets, though most of her belongings had been boxed up. Rachel had turned the room into some kind of minimalist guest suite, but a few original pieces remained: the vanity, the cedar chest, now empty, and a heavy-framed photograph of Grandma and Grandpa on their wedding day hanging above the dresser. Something about that frame caught my attention. It wasn't hanging quite flush against the wall. The bottom left corner tilted forward just slightly. I stepped closer, running my fingers along the edge. The frame was old, solid wood, heavier than it looked. When I lifted it, I noticed a small envelope taped behind it. My heart skipped a beat. The envelope was yellowed with age, and across the front in Grandma's handwriting were the words, "For when the time comes." I sat down on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling as I opened it. Inside was a folded document, crisp despite the years. It was another copy of her will, but this wasn't just any copy. This one had a handwritten note at the bottom, dated shortly before her hospitalization. In her shaky but unmistakable script, it read, "I have not changed my mind. The house belongs to both Ethan and Celeste, equally, no matter what others may say." I stared at the note for a long time, my chest tightening. There it was, her voice preserved in ink. Proof that she had been aware of pressure. Proof that she'd reaffirmed her intentions even as her health declined. I quickly took out my phone and snapped clear photos of every page, every signature, every corner of the note. Then I carefully refolded it, taped the envelope back behind the frame exactly as I'd found it. As I stood up, I caught my reflection in the vanity mirror. For a moment, I barely recognized myself. My eyes were sharper. My expression wasn't that of the good daughter anymore. It was the face of someone who finally had leverage. Before leaving the room, I checked the closet where I'd noticed the small safe the other day. It was still there, tucked behind a row of winter coats. I knelt down and inspected it more carefully this time. It wasn't anything high-tech, just a simple combination lock, and on top of it sat a half-open shoebox filled with old receipts. Curious, I sifted through them. Most were unimportant, but one stood out. A receipt from a law office dated just days before Grandma's hospitalization. The memo line read, "Title transfer filing." I photographed it. I moved methodically through the rest of the house. In the kitchen drawers, I found contractor invoices with Ethan's signature. In the study, tucked behind a stack of magazines, I found an unsigned copy of a listing agreement dated months earlier than Ethan's official announcement. They'd planned this long before they told me. The more I uncovered, the less I recognized the people I'd grown up with. I paused in the hallway, staring at the family photos still hanging there. Ethan in his varsity jacket, Mom and Dad smiling at his graduation. Me, usually off to the side, holding flowers or a certificate, always a step away from the center. But this time, I wasn't going to be pushed to the margins. Just as I was finishing up in the kitchen, I heard a car pulling into the driveway. My heart jumped. Ethan wasn't supposed to be home yet. I quickly grabbed my rag and brush, setting them on the counter as if I'd been working the whole time. The front door opened. Ethan's voice rang out. "Sel, you here?" "In the kitchen," I called back, forcing my voice to sound light. He walked in wearing his work clothes, looking pleasantly surprised. "Wow, you're really going at it. Place looks great." "Yeah, I figured I'd get a head start on the details," I said, wiping a perfectly clean countertop. "Buyers love that stuff." He nodded approvingly. "You've always been thorough. Hey, I was actually gonna ask if you could help me set up the display table for the open house. You know, with the cookies and brochures and whatever." "Of course," I said, smiling. Inside, I was still buzzing from what I'd found upstairs. He leaned casually against the counter. "It's nice having you on board. I wasn't sure how you'd react to everything, but this feels good, like old times." "Yeah," I said softly, meeting his eyes. "Like old times." Except it was, not even close. As soon as he left the room to take a call, I exhaled slowly. My pulse was racing. In my bag sat the photos of Grandma's hidden letter, proof that she never intended to give him the house alone. Proof that my parents' actions had directly violated her final wishes. I locked the door behind me when I left that afternoon, keys jingling in my hand. For the first time since this began, I wasn't just gathering fragments of the truth. I had the heart of it. The following week felt like walking a tightrope. On the surface, everything looked calm. Ethan thought I was helping him prep the house out of sisterly loyalty. Mom thought I'd come to my senses. And Dad, in his usual detached way, seemed content to watch everything unfold without lifting a finger. But beneath the surface, I could feel the shift. A quiet, subtle change in the way they looked at me. It started with Mom. She called me on Tuesday evening, her voice honey-sweet. "Hi, sweetheart. How, work been? You've been spending a lot of time at the house lately, haven't you?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Yeah, just helping Ethan get everything ready for the open house." "I think that's so generous of you," she said. "Honestly, I'm proud of how mature you're being. Not everyone can put family first the way you do." There it was, that tone, the one she used when she was fishing. "I just want the house to look good," I said evenly. "Of course," she replied too quickly. "You've always cared about appearances. I mean, you worked so hard on that place. I'm glad you're finally letting go of, the emotional part." "The emotional part." "I guess so," I murmured. She hummed softly, the way she did when she wanted to fill silence without committing to anything. Ethan told me you've been amazing. He said it almost feels like old times between you two. Isn't that nice?" "It is," I said, forcing a light laugh. But inside, every part of me was on alert. She was testing me, trying to gauge whether my sudden cooperation was real or just surface level. Before we hung up, she added casually, "Oh, by the way, I noticed you've been looking through some of Dad's old files the other day. When you were in the study. I hope you weren't confused by anything you found. Legal paperwork can be so complicated, right?" Her voice was gentle, but the question was anything but innocent. "I was just curious," I said quickly. I didn't really understand most of it. A beat of silence. Then she laughed lightly. "Of course, you're not really the legal documents type, are you?" The call ended a few minutes later, but my heart kept pounding long after. She knew I'd seen something, maybe not exactly what, but enough to make her uneasy. Ethan, meanwhile, started dropping little comments when we were alone. "You're being really helpful," he said one afternoon while we were setting up furniture for the staging. "I have to admit, I didn't expect you to take this so well. I thought you'd, be more dramatic." Why would I? I said lightly. It's not my house. He looked at me a little too long, like he was trying to see beneath the surface. Then he shrugged. Yeah, I guess you've finally grown up. His words made my jaw tighten, but I kept my smile steady. One evening, I stayed late at the house after Ethan left. I told him I wanted to fix some chipped paint on the banister. In reality, I was organizing the evidence I'd collected. Photos of the will with Grandma's handwritten note, copies of the deed transfer and power of attorney documents, the lawyer's receipt from the shoebox, screenshots of the real estate listing and contractor invoices. I spread everything out on the dining table under the warm light of the chandelier. For a moment, it almost looked like the house itself was watching me, quietly approving. Then headlights flashed through the front window. A car pulled into the driveway. Panic shot through me. I quickly shoved everything back into my folder just as Mom stepped through the front door. Celeste, she called. I forced my voice to stay calm. In here. She walked into the dining room holding a container of lasagna. I brought dinner for Ethan and Rachel. Thought I'd drop it off. Didn't expect to see you here so late. Yeah, I said, pointing at the banister. Just wanted to finish this before the open house. She nodded slowly, her eyes scanning the room. For a second, I thought she saw the edge of a document sticking out of my folder. My palms went slick with sweat, then her expression softened. You know, she said, stepping closer, it means a lot that you're helping. I was worried you'd hold on to bitterness, but you're proving me wrong. I knew you'd do the right thing eventually. Her words were sweet, but her eyes sharp. I just want what's best for everyone, I said softly. She smiled and reached out to touch my arm. That's my girl. I held her gaze, letting her see exactly what she expected, the dutiful, compliant daughter, nothing more. When she left, I locked the door behind her and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. They were starting to circle, like sharks sensing blood. Over the next week, the tension simmered quietly. Mom made more casual visits. Dad suddenly asked if I needed help understanding any paperwork. Ethan asked if I was comfortable with how the sale was going, his tone just a little too probing. They were trying to figure out if I was still a pawn or if I'd become something else. So I gave them what they wanted. I smiled. I nodded. I baked cookies for the open house and arranged flowers like the good daughter they remembered. Meanwhile, Hannah and I were building the skeleton of a legal case. She confirmed that Grandma's medical records from the weeks before the transfer would strongly support a claim of incapacity. She was already drafting preliminary letters in case we needed to freeze the sale. I hadn't told anyone in my family. Not yet. Timing was everything. I wanted them relaxed, complacent. So when Ethan handed me the keys one evening and said, "You're the best, sis," I just smiled and said, "Anything for family." And for the first time, I meant it, just not in the way he thought. I had been living a double life for weeks. On one side, I was the helpful sister, sanding banisters, fluffing pillows, making cookies for open house days. On the other, I was quietly piecing together the threads of a deception that ran far deeper than I'd imagined. Hannah and I were meeting twice a week now. We built a strong foundation. The will, the power of attorney timeline, Grandma's medical records, and the handwritten note hidden behind the photo frame. It was already enough to contest the deed. But something still nagged at me, a tiny, persistent thread at the edge of the tapestry. It started with a letter. One Wednesday morning, I stopped by the house earlier than usual. Ethan and Rachel weren't home, but a thick white envelope had been shoved halfway through the mail slot. The logo in the corner read Fairview Community Bank. Curious, I slipped it into my bag and went about my usual staging tasks. Later, in the quiet of my apartment, I opened it. The letter was addressed to Ethan Lambert, but the language made my stomach drop. This is a final notice regarding your outstanding home equity loan. Failure to remit the overdue payment of $17,600 may result in foreclosure proceedings. Collateral property, 214 Willow Creek. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Foreclosure, collateral property. The house. I read the letter again, slower this time. Ethan had taken out a home equity loan against the house that he'd transferred to his name using power of attorney, and now he was behind on payments. I called Hannah immediately. She answered on the second ring. "What's up?" I sent her a photo of the letter. There was a pause. Then, "Oh, Celeste, this is big." "What does it mean?" "It means your brother leveraged the house to borrow money. If he defaults, the bank can seize the property regardless of the will or deed dispute. You'd both lose." My hands went cold. "He didn't tell me any of this." "Of course he didn't," she said sharply. "And based on the timeline, he probably did it after the deed transfer, which makes it look like this was part of a bigger plan. Do you have any idea what he used the money for? I thought of the glossy brochures for lake houses I'd seen on the dining table, the pre-approval letters. I have a guess. Celeste, Hannah said carefully, if your parents knew about this? They did, I whispered, the realization hitting me like a wave. They must have. Dad signed the power of attorney. Mom was a witness. They had to know what he was doing. I couldn't sit still. I drove back to my parents' house that evening under the pretense of dropping off some papers. Mom was in the kitchen, as usual, making tea. Sweetheart, she said warmly, you've been around so much lately, it's nice. I held up the envelope. I found this in the mail slot at the house. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she recovered. Oh, must have been delivered by mistake. It's addressed to Ethan, I said, my voice steady. She took the envelope from me too quickly. I'll make sure he gets it. I didn't move. Mom, did you know he took out a loan against the house? Her eyes flicked up to mine, and for the first time in weeks I saw real discomfort. Celeste, this isn't your concern. It is my concern, I said sharply. If the bank forecloses, we all lose the house, including me. Technically, she said coolly, you don't own any part of it. Ethan does. I stared at her. Because you and Dad made sure of that. Her jaw tightened. He needed help. The bank required collateral. It made sense to use the house. And Ethan promised he'd keep up with the payments. This is just a hiccup. A hiccup, I repeated, incredulous. He's $17,000 behind? She waved a hand dismissively as if it were pocket change. Ethan's career is taking off. He'll sort it out. I felt my voice rising despite my best efforts. And if he does, her eyes hardened. Then we'll handle it as a family, but you don't need to worry your head about this. You have enough on your plate. And there it was again, the subtle, infuriating dismissal. As if I were a child poking my nose where it didn't belong. But this time, I didn't shrink. I leaned forward across the counter. You knew, you and Dad both. You didn't just help Ethan steal that house, you risked losing it entirely. Grandma's house, the one she wanted us to share. She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned and walked out, my heart pounding. I drove straight to Hannah's office. We spread the letter and my notes out on her desk. This changes everything, she said. If the house is tied up in debt, we need to move fast. We can file a lease pendens, basically a notice of pending litigation, which can freeze the property's sale and block foreclosure proceedings until the dispute is resolved. How fast? Tomorrow, I nodded slowly. Do it. She studied me for a moment. Are you ready for what this means, Celeste? Once this goes through, your family will know you're not playing along anymore. I looked down at the letter again, at Ethan's name in bold. I thought about Grandma's handwriting, her quiet voice saying, I trust you, sweetheart. I'm done playing, I said. That night, Ethan called me. His voice was unusually tense. Hey, did Mom give you some mail or something? Yeah, I said. Why? He hesitated. Just if you saw anything, it's not a big deal, okay? I've got it handled. Sure, I said, letting my voice go airy. No big deal. But inside, the game had changed. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about power, control, and the fact that my family had gambled with something sacred, not for love, not for legacy, but for Ethan's debt. Twist 2 had landed. And this time, I wasn't just reacting. I was striking back. The day I filed the lease pendens felt like stepping across an invisible line I could never return from. Hannah and I arrived at the county clerk's office early in the morning. The building was quiet and cold, its tiled floors echoing with every step. I clutched the folder against my chest like a shield. This will officially notify the county, Hannah explained, her heels clicking as we walked down the hall. Once it's filed, no one can legally sell, transfer, or foreclose on the house until the court resolves the ownership dispute. I nodded, my throat dry. At the clerk's counter, I signed my name on the final document. My signature looked small and neat on the page, deceptively ordinary, considering what it represented. When the clerk stamped the paperwork and slid it back to Hannah, it felt like thunder rolling through the walls. It's done, Hannah said quietly. I exhaled slowly. For weeks, I'd been dancing around my family's lies, gathering evidence in secret. But this was the moment I stopped moving around their game. I'd made my own move. They found out that afternoon. I was at work when my phone started vibrating nonstop. Missed calls from Mom, Dad, Ethan, then a short text from Ethan that made my stomach clench. ETHAN, what the hell did you do? 5 minutes later, Mom called again. I answered this time. Celeste, her voice was ice. We need to talk now, I hesitated. I'm at work. Then leave, she snapped. When I arrived at my parents' house that evening, all 3 of them were waiting for me in the living room. It felt like stepping into a courtroom where I was both defendant and judge. Ethan was pacing, his face red. Mom sat rigid on the couch, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Dad leaned back in his armchair, arms crossed, watching. "What did you do?" Ethan demanded as soon as I walked in. I shut the door calmly. "I filed a lease pendens. It means you can't sell the house until the ownership dispute is resolved." His jaw dropped. "You what? Are you insane?" Mom shot him a look to quiet down, then turned to me. Her voice was deceptively calm. "Celeste, why would you do something like this? We could have talked." "We did talk," I said, my voice steady. "You dismissed me, over and over. You told me it wasn't my concern. You lied to me about the will, about the deed, about the loan. I gave you every chance to be honest." Ethan stepped forward, jabbing a finger toward me. "You're going to ruin everything. Do you understand that? The sale, the new house, everything. You're dragging this into court like some stranger." "I'm not the one who took out a loan against a house you stole," I shot back. His face turned crimson. "Stole? That house is legally mine. Because Dad used power of attorney when Grandma was too sick to understand what she was signing," I said sharply. "And because you all hoped I'd stay quiet." Mom stood up. "Enough," she said, her voice cutting through the air like glass. "This family has always solved its problems within the family. Airing our dirty laundry in court is beneath us." I laughed, a bitter, quiet sound. "Beneath us? What you did to Grandma's will was beneath us." Her expression hardened. "You're acting like a child." "No," I said, stepping forward. "I'm finally acting like someone who refuses to be treated like one." Dad finally spoke for the first time, his voice measured but cold. "You're making a mistake, Celeste. Lawyers cost money. Lawsuits tear families apart. At the end of the day, all you'll get is heartache." I met his gaze. "You mean your heartache?" Mom tried a different tactic then, the one she'd used all my life. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "you've always been the reasonable one. Don't let bitterness ruin that. Think about the bigger picture. This will drag on for years. Is that really what you want?" "Yes," I said simply. The room went still. Ethan threw his hands up. "Unbelievable. She's gone off the deep end." "I just want what Grandma intended," I said, my voice calm even as my hands shook. "Half, that's all, what she wrote in her will, what she told me." "You don't deserve half," Ethan spat. "You didn't build anything. You didn't sacrifice. I was the one taking care of things." I stared at him. "You mean you were the one borrowing against it?" His face twisted. "You're doing this because you're jealous." "No," I said quietly. "I'm doing this because you lied. All of you did." Mom stepped closer then, lowering her voice to a near whisper. "Celeste, if you stop this now, we can fix everything. Ethan will make the payments. We'll sell the house and maybe we can give you a small portion of the proceeds as a gesture of goodwill. But if you keep pushing," I tilted my head. "You'll what? Disown me?" Her silence was answer enough. I took a deep breath. "I'm not backing down. This isn't just about money. It's about Grandma. It's about the truth. And if it takes a courtroom to make you see that, so be it." When I left that night, the air outside was cool and sharp. My legs were shaking as I walked to my car, but my heart felt steady. They had shown their true faces, desperate, angry, cornered. And for the first time, I wasn't the one trapped in the corner. The weeks after filing the lawsuit felt like living inside a pressure cooker. Every day, something new came at me, not through legal channels, but through the insidious, invisible networks of family gossip and manipulation that my mother had perfected over decades. It started subtly. My aunt called me one evening, her voice hesitant. "Celeste, honey, I heard about what's going on. Are you sure this is wise? Family lawsuits can get messy." I took a deep breath. "I know what I'm doing," she sighed. "Your mother says you're angry, that this is all about resentment toward Ethan. She says Grandma wanted him to have the house and that you're twisting things because you feel left out." I closed my eyes, forcing down the sting. "That's not true. You saw the will. You were there when she talked about it." A pause. "I know, sweetheart, but people remember what they want to." The next day, I ran into an old family friend at the grocery store. She gave me that look, the one halfway between pity and judgment. "I heard there's trouble," she said delicately. "I always thought you were the sensible one." "I still am," I replied, trying to smile. "Well," she said, patting my arm, "families go through things. I'm sure you'll apologize and make it right soon." Her words lingered like smoke after she walked away. At the same time, Ethan escalated his tactics. He started posting cryptic messages on social media about betrayal from those closest to you, and sharing cheerful photos of his wife and kids at the house, painting himself as the hardworking family man under attack. Mutual friends began messaging me awkwardly. "Hey, what's going on?" Ethan's posts seem intense. He knew exactly what he was doing, turning the narrative into Ethan versus the bitter sister. And Mom, she took it further. She called my boss. I found out when my manager pulled me into his office one Friday. "Celeste," he said gently, "I got a call from someone named Margaret Lambert. She said she was your mother." My stomach dropped. "Oh my God." "She was concerned," he continued carefully. "She implied you might be under a lot of stress and that your work could be affected. She suggested we keep an eye on you." I felt heat rising to my face. "That's not true, I'm fine." "I know," he said quickly, "and your performance is solid. But I just wanted you to know what's happening. Whatever's going on with your family, I've got your back. But this kind of thing can be tricky HR-wise." I left his office shaking. My own mother had tried to undermine me professionally. At home, the messages started. Anonymous numbers texting me things like, "You're tearing your family apart. Grandma would be ashamed of you. Drop the lawsuit before it destroys everything." I recognized Ethan's tone in some of them, Mom's phrasing in others. It was like they'd weaponized my entire support network against me. But something unexpected happened during that time, too. People I didn't expect started reaching out. My cousin Lily, who had always been quiet during family gatherings, sent me a DM one night. "I found out what Ethan did. I think you're right to fight. They've always treated you unfairly." My godmother, who'd always adored Grandma, called to say she still had copies of some old letters, including one where Grandma wrote about wanting both children to build a future together in the house. She offered to give them to my lawyer. Even one of Ethan's old friends, a contractor who'd worked on the house, came forward quietly with invoices and emails that showed Ethan had been planning to flip the house long before he claimed it was about family. The tide was shifting, slowly, quietly, beneath the noise. Meanwhile, the legal wheels were turning. Hannah filed for a temporary injunction to prevent the foreclosure. We gathered witness statements and medical records. The first hearing date was set for late spring. When Ethan found out, he cornered me in the driveway of the house one evening. I'd gone to pick up a few remaining personal things Grandma had left for me. He pulled up behind me, slammed the car door, and strode over like he owned the ground beneath his feet. "What the hell are you trying to do?" he hissed. "Protect what's mine," I said, standing my ground. "This isn't yours," he shouted, loud enough that the neighbor's porch lights flicked on. "You're destroying the family for a house?" "It's not just a house," I said evenly. "It's her legacy, and you tried to erase me from it." His face twisted in rage. "You think you're better than me. You think you deserve it more? You're nothing but a jealous brat who can't stand that Mom and Dad finally saw me as the responsible one." I didn't flinch. Responsible people don't take out loans they can't pay back. For a moment, I thought he might hit me. His hands clenched, jaw tight. Then he turned on his heel and stormed off. I stood there in the cool evening air, my heart pounding. But instead of fear, I felt something else, steel. As spring approached, it was clear. Lines had been drawn. Mom had turned parts of the family against me. Ethan had tried to publicly humiliate me. Dad remained eerily silent, watching from his corner like a man protecting his own reputation above all else. And me, I wasn't backing down. Every whisper behind my back, every manipulative phone call, every look of pity, all of it just hardened my resolve. Because this wasn't about their narrative anymore. It was about the truth. And soon, that truth was going to court. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and polished floors. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching in the dust motes like suspended stars. As I walked down the corridor toward the courtroom, the heels of my shoes clicked steadily, echoing louder than I felt inside. My palms were slick, but my back was straight. This was it. Weeks of whispers, legal filings, sleepless nights, and staged smiles had all led to this moment. No more pretending, no more good daughter. Just me, Celeste Lambert, walking into a legal battle against my own blood. Ethan was already inside when I arrived, sitting at the table with his attorney, a slick man in a tailored navy suit who looked like he specialized in corporate takeovers, not family disputes. Ethan looked polished too, in a way that didn't suit him. Crisp suit, forced confidence. He didn't look at me when I sat down at the opposite table with Hannah. Mom sat directly behind him, lips pressed into a thin line. Dad sat a seat away, arms folded, gaze fixed on some invisible point in the middle distance. When the judge entered, everyone rose. My heart hammered. The opening statements were surreal. Ethan's lawyer painted a picture of a devoted son who had sacrificed his own time and resources to maintain the family home and graciously accepted ownership to ensure stability for future generations. He framed me as the estranged sister who had shown little interest in the property until financial stakes became involved. It was like listening to someone describe an alternate universe. Then Hannah stood. Her voice was calm, deliberate, surgical. This case is not about sibling rivalry, she said, facing the judge. It is about the clear, documented wishes of a woman who entrusted her legacy to both her grandchildren equally, and the systematic, legally questionable actions that stripped one of them of that legacy without consent. We will show evidence that the transfer of the property occurred when the decedent was medically incapacitated, using power of attorney under ethically dubious circumstances. We will present witness testimony, medical records, and financial documents that reveal not a family misunderstanding, but a coordinated decision to exclude my client. I watched Ethan's lawyer's confident smile flicker, just slightly. The first witness was Dr. Patel, Grandma's physician during her final months. He was polite, composed, and devastatingly clear. Would you say Mrs. Lambert had full legal capacity to make binding property decisions 3 weeks before her death? Hannah asked. Dr. Patel adjusted his glasses. No, she was under heavy medication in hospice-level care. Her cognitive abilities were significantly impaired. Ethan's lawyer tried to poke holes, but the doctor didn't waver. The second witness was Lily, my cousin. Her hands shook as she testified, but her words were firm. I remember Grandma talking to me about the house, she said. She told me she wanted both Celeste and Ethan to have it. She said, I want them to build something together. When Ethan's lawyer tried to imply she was coached, she snapped, I don't need to be coached to remember my own grandmother. But the real tension came when Hannah presented the handwritten note from behind the photo frame. The courtroom grew silent as the judge read it aloud. I have not changed my mind. The house belongs to both Ethan and Celeste, equally, no matter what others may say. Mom's face turned pale. Ethan shifted in his seat, jaw tight. For the first time, I saw Dad glance sideways at the two of them, not in support, but with something like unease. During a short recess, I stepped into the hallway to breathe. My chest felt tight, but my mind was clear. That's when Dad approached me. He didn't say anything at first, just stood next to me, staring at the courthouse wall like it held answers. Finally, he said quietly, This is getting ugly. I turned to him. It got ugly the moment you signed away Grandma's house. He didn't deny it. You're not going to back down, are you? No, I said, I'm not. He exhaled slowly, and for the first time there was something like fear in his eyes. You should know, Ethan didn't tell you everything about the loan. I froze. What do you mean? But before he could continue, Mom appeared, her eyes sharp. What are you doing? She snapped at him. He straightened. Nothing. But the damage was done. There was a crack, small but real. For the first time, I realized Dad wasn't as united with them as he looked, and that crack might be exactly what I needed. By the second day in court, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every seat in the small courtroom was filled, not just with family, but with neighbors, distant relatives, and curious onlookers who'd caught wind of the Lambert inheritance case. Ethan walked in with his lawyer like a man going to war, shoulders squared, jaw clenched. Mom followed behind him, every inch the matriarch, expression cold and controlled. Dad, as always, trailed silently, but now I was watching him closely. Hannah leaned toward me at our table. He's cracking, she whispered. Your dad, did you see the way he looked yesterday when the note came out? I nodded. He said something to me in the hallway, about Ethan not telling me everything about the loan. Mom cut him off. Her eyes narrowed. If he flips, I know, I whispered. It changes everything. The first half of the day was all about the loan. Hannah called a financial officer from Fairview Community Bank to the stand. He testified, clearly and factually, that Ethan had taken out a $200,000 home equity loan against the property shortly after the deed transfer, and that he was behind on payments. The judge's brow furrowed as he listened. Ethan's lawyer tried to argue that it was irrelevant to the will dispute, but Hannah cut him off smoothly. It speaks directly to motive, Your Honor. This wasn't about family stewardship. It was about liquidating a shared inheritance for personal gain. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mom's face was tight, but her eyes flicked toward Dad just briefly. Then came the bombshell moment. Hannah called my father to the stand. I hadn't expected it so soon. My stomach twisted as he walked slowly to the witness chair, looking older than I'd ever seen him. He raised his hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. Mr. Lambert, Hannah began gently, you held power of attorney for your mother in the weeks before her death. Is that correct? Yes. His voice was steady but quiet. And you were the one who signed the deed transferring the house to your son, Ethan Lambert? Yes. Hannah nodded, pacing slowly. At that time, Mrs. Lambert was in hospice care under heavy medication. You heard Dr. Patel's testimony yesterday. Do you agree that her cognitive abilities were severely diminished? A pause. Yes. A ripple went through the room. Ethan stiffened. Mom's fingers dug into the arm of her chair. "Why did you sign the house over to Ethan?" Hannah asked. He hesitated. For a long moment it was silent, so silent I could hear the faint buzz of the overhead lights. Then he said it. "Because Ethan asked me to." The words hit the room like a gavel. Ethan jerked his head toward him. "Dad, I was told it was temporary," Dad continued, voice suddenly firmer, "that he needed the house in his name to secure a loan to expand his business. He promised it would be reversed after. Your mother agreed. I didn't think it would go this far." Mom shot up from her seat. "Robert," the judge banged the gavel. "Mrs. Lambert, sit down." Ethan's lawyer scrambled. "Objection, overruled," the judge said sharply. I stared at Dad, my pulse pounding. He wasn't doing this for me, I knew that. He was doing it to protect himself, to avoid being painted as the mastermind. But it didn't matter. Because in that moment, the entire foundation of Ethan's defense cracked wide open. Hannah seized the moment. "So to be clear," she said slowly, "the transfer wasn't initiated by Mrs. Lambert's explicit request, but by Ethan's request, which you and your wife facilitated?" Dad nodded. "Yes, and at no point was Celeste informed or consulted, despite being named as a joint beneficiary in the will? No, and you were aware your mother's medical state made it unlikely she fully understood the implications of the transfer." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "Yes." The courtroom was utterly silent. Ethan sat frozen, eyes wide, his lawyer whispering furiously into his ear. Mom looked like she'd been struck not just by his words, but by the fact that he'd broken ranks. Outside the courthouse during the recess, the family chaos exploded. Ethan stormed up to Dad in the parking lot. "What the hell was that?" he shouted. "You just threw me under the bus." Dad didn't raise his voice. "You lied to me about the loan. You said it was for your business. You didn't tell me you were drowning in debt. You made me complicit." Mom tried to intervene, but Ethan whirled on her too. "You told me Dad would back me no matter what." The three of them stood there, unraveling in public, and for once I wasn't in the middle. I was standing off to the side with Hannah, watching the cracks become chasms. "This," Hannah whispered, "is exactly what we needed." Back inside, Ethan took the stand after lunch. He was sweating under the courtroom lights. His lawyer tried to keep control, but Hannah's cross-examination was relentless. She held up the bank letter, the loan documents, the timeline. Piece by piece, she pinned him down until he had no choice but to admit what he'd done. When she finally asked, "Did you ever inform your sister of your plans to sell the house and use the proceeds to pay off your personal debts?" Ethan's voice cracked as he said, "No." The judge's expression said it all. When the day ended, I walked out of the courtroom into the golden late afternoon light. My legs were weak, but my chest felt lighter than it had in months. The twist I hadn't seen coming, Dad flipping to save himself, had become the lever that turned the entire case. And for the first time, I could see it clearly. I was going to win. The final day in court dawned gray and cool, the sky stretched like a muted canvas over the courthouse. I arrived early, sitting alone on a bench outside the courtroom, breathing in the stillness. It felt different now. The first day I'd walked in terrified, clutching my courage like a fragile secret. Today I walked in standing tall. Hannah sat beside me, flipping through her notes one last time. "How are you feeling?" she asked quietly. I smiled faintly. "Like whatever happens, I finally told the truth out loud." She nodded. "That's already a victory." The courtroom filled quickly. Ethan looked exhausted, his one sharp suit wrinkled at the edges, eyes ringed with sleepless nights. Mom's mask of composure was cracking. She avoided everyone's gaze. Dad sat separately from them now, not close to me, but not by their side either. The fault lines were visible to everyone. The judge entered, and silence settled over the room. He began by summarizing the facts of the case. The original will naming both Celeste and Ethan as joint beneficiaries. The power of attorney transfer conducted when the grandmother was medically incapacitated. The lack of consultation with Celeste, Ethan's use of the property for a personal loan, and the corroborating testimonies from medical and financial witnesses. When he paused, I held my breath. "This court," he said slowly, "finds the deed transfer to Ethan Lambert legally void due to lack of capacity and undue influence. The property shall revert to the estate and be divided according to the will equally between Celeste Lambert and Ethan Lambert." The words hit me like sunlight breaking through clouds. Ethan slumped back in his chair, face pale. Mom gasped quietly, pressing a hand to her chest. Dad closed his eyes, expression unreadable. But I just breathed. For the first time in years, I felt the weight on my chest lift. After the ruling, Ethan stormed out without looking at me. Mom followed, snapping at reporters who had gathered outside the courthouse. Dad lingered behind. For a moment, I thought he might say something. He didn't. He just gave a small, almost imperceptible nod before walking away, and that was fine, because this was no longer about earning their approval. Hannah hugged me tightly on the courthouse steps. "You did it," she said against my shoulder. "No," I whispered. "We did." The following weeks were a whirlwind. The bank froze foreclosure proceedings, the house title was legally corrected, and Ethan's loan mess became his own problem to solve. He tried to negotiate with me privately, offering to buy me out at a fraction of the market value, but I declined. Instead, I made my own choice. I decided to sell my half on my terms, not to Ethan, not under pressure, but to a restoration group that specialized in preserving historic homes. They respected the house. They wanted to keep its spirit alive. When I signed the papers, I didn't feel bitterness. I felt peace. One afternoon, I went back to the house one last time. The rooms were empty now, stripped of furniture and tension alike. Sunlight poured through the windows, catching on the dust in the air. I walked slowly through each room, the kitchen where Mom used to hum, the living room where Ethan and I played as kids, Grandma's bedroom where her note had waited for me all those years. I stopped at the front door, pressing my palm against the cool wood. "This house survived all of us," I whispered. "And now it's finally free, just like me." I locked the door for the last time and stepped outside into the crisp afternoon. Months later, I stood in my own apartment, one I'd chosen, paid for, and built my life in without anyone's permission. A few of Grandma's keepsakes sat on my shelves, her wedding photo, a jar of lavender sachets, and the framed copy of her handwritten note. I have not changed my mind. The house belongs to both Ethan and Celeste, equally, no matter what others may say. Those words had once broken my heart. Now they reminded me of who I was, not the overlooked daughter. Not the accommodating sister, but someone who stood up, fought back, and won not out of vengeance, but out of love and respect for herself and the woman who believed in her. Justice didn't give me back the family I once wished for, but it gave me something better, my voice, my freedom, and the truth, and that was enough.